why are we talking about burnout again? Stacey, why are you talking about burnout again? And the reason why I believe this topic is of the utmost importance is because I think often we don't really truly recognize the signs, the symptoms. We kind of gloss over things that could be causing burnout. We don't often recognize those red flags associated with burnout until it's too late. This is the reason why burnout is so important. 2023 is here. We want to welcome it with open arms, and we want to step into 2023 with all of the necessary tools to succeed in this year, to make this year the best year ever. And that is what I want for you. That is what I want for all of us. So we're going to revisit burnout one more time. One more time. We're talking about recognition, recovery, and reduction of burnout. And I want to, as always, when I'm giving talks like this, start with an air of transparency. One of the most important things as women that we can do is share our stories, because it's through the vein, through the catalyst of stories, that we can share our experiences, let one another know that we're not alone in any struggle that we're dealing with, and we can offer very valuable information to one another as to how we overcame, how we overcome obstacles and things that are in our way. And so I am not, the power of sharing stories is not lost on me, especially as a clinician, especially as a consultant. These are things I use all the time with clients, all the time with patients, even on that one-to-one level at the bedside, because I want people to know, and I want women in specific to know, that you are not alone. And even someone as high functioning as myself, yes, I deal with burnout too. Let me tell you my burnout story. 2019 was a year. It was a good year. It was a good year, and it was ending well for me. My mom and I decided to travel to Costa Rica together in September for a 2-week long vacation, and we were so excited about it. This was our first time traveling, just her and I together, and we had a well, actually, it wasn't the first time. It was one of a few opportunities that we had to travel together. But we were going to be gone for 2 weeks this time, just her and I. It was a wonderful bonding experience. And while we were vacationing, I took that moment to really outline what it was I wanted to do for the year 2022. I had it all planned out, all laid out. I wanted to strike out on my own and create a brand new business. I wanted to volunteer more. I wanted to be more socially active. I wanted to make a mark and etch my mark deeper than what I was doing in the past. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to do something different, something more powerful. So I devised my plan, and we arrived back on US soil, and I was so excited about implementing all the plans I had created in Costa Rica in preparation for 2022. And then, as you well know, 2022 came, and it came with a vengeance, and it totally upended our world. As a member of that global community, certainly I was greatly affected by the pandemic. But as a clinician, there was a certain level of impact that I experienced along with my medical colleagues that I think the rest of the world was not privy to. It was a very, very difficult year in medicine as a clinician. 2021, I'm sorry, 2020, I think I said 2022. 2021 was not much better, and 2022 not much better. I know people are describing the situation we're in right now as a post-pandemic era. We're not in a post-pandemic era. This is still I call it a peri-pandemic era. There's still there's a lot of things going on as a result of the pandemic that I think we will be dealing with for a very long time. But being in the thick of it at the top of 2020, very, very difficult. So going into the hospital, seeing patients like I normally do in the emergency room, seeing them in acute settings, but adding on top of that, this pandemic, the fear, the uncertainty, the level of patients that we were seeing every day, staying late to fulfill um, requirements from my employer, coming in early to try to help lessen the load, picking up more responsibility to help my colleagues get through what we were going through, just trying to pitch in just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. It took its toll on me. But again, being a high functioning person, as I've always been, I just pushed through, pushed through, pushed through. 2020, 2021, 2022. I want to add, though, that in addition to the clinical stress, there were also a series of uprisings that happened in that same time frame. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rashard Brooks, right in my own backyard of Atlanta, Georgia. And I became very, very involved in the grassroots movement as it pertains to Black Lives Matter and other local movements in Atlanta. Canvassing, protesting, writing, speaking, advocating, doing all of these things. So that piece of the puzzle combined with my clinical work really made things very difficult for me. I've always been the kind of person, and when I say high functioning, I know many of you can relate. High functioning women, I know you can relate when I say what I'm about to say. We can very easily have 10, 20, 30 plates spinning at one time, and we balance them all, and we can walk through the world balancing all of those spinning plates with grace and poise and elegance, and the outside world thinks that we're doing fine, we're doing well. And we pride ourselves a lot of times on the fact that we can manage that level of function. 2021 was the year that the plates for me fell down. And I recognized very quickly that if I didn't do something about the way that I was managing the stress level at work, the way that I was managing the stress levels pertaining to the uprisings and social injustices, that something detrimental was going to happen. I could just feel it. You know how you can just kind of feel this sense of impending doom, or maybe a sense of foreboding in a way. That was how I felt in 2021. 2021 was the first year that I ever sought counseling. I signed up, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made. And I share that story because, again, I want you to understand that if you don't recognize the signs and symptoms of burnout, coupled with recognizing the way that you deal with stress, it can be a very, very dangerous situation. And this is the reason why it's very important at the top of 2023 that we have conversations like this. I wonder if you can relate to the story that I told. If you can see glimpses of yourself in that story. Doesn't mean that you have to be a clinician, doesn't mean that you have to have been involved in the uprisings in any way. But I wonder if you can relate to levels of high functionality, taking on perhaps a bit more than you should, not knowing when to say no, not knowing when to pump the brakes, not knowing when to unplug, rest, rejuvenate. I wonder if you can relate to any of that. I'm sure you can. So today we're talking again about burnout, and we're going to talk specifically about how to recognize it. What is burnout anyway? We have this idea of what it is. We want to get really specific in terms of what burnout really is, not some textbook clinical definition, but we need to go beyond the barriers of that. We're also going to talk about recovery from burnout. What can you do? What tactical, tangible things can you do to recover from burnout? And then that kind of flows into the next part of this, which is reduction. How can we reduce the prevalence of burnout in our lives? especially moving forward in this new year of 2023. And lastly, I want you to take the next hour with me to reflect. Reflect on your life, reflect on who you are. Again, taking cues from the story that I shared with you, reflect on how you perhaps deal with stress, reflect on how you've been affected by burnout. This is a really important time to do that because it's something that we often don't do as women. We don't sit down and think and reflect on what we've endured, what we've gone through, and ways that we can turn the page in a healthy way. This is what we want to do. So, again, what exactly is burnout? What is it? It's this term that we hear all the time. It's something we know exists. And if someone were to ask you, what is burnout? How would you define it? You would likely come up with a decent definition of it. But I want to share the definition that comes from the World Health Organization. And that is that burnout is almost a constellation, if you will, of things. It's a constellation, it's a concept made up of a variety of changes that we may experience as a result of excessive stress. We know that stress is a part of life. We know this. This is nothing new. We know that that's just par for the course. That's not burnout. Stress is part of burnout, but burnout is stress on 10. Burnout is stress times 15. Burnout is stress on steroids. That's what it is. And it's important to understand too that burnout is not only stress, but the ways that stress is manifested in the physical and mental apparatus. And I would say the emotional apparatus as well. So according to the to WHO, World Health Organization, burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress. That's very, very important to underline. Chronic workplace and stress. This is the textbook version of burnout, okay? So chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. There are three important dimensions, according to the World Health Organization, three very important dimensions to burnout that I want to share, that I want you to be aware of. The first is feelings of energy depletion or feeling exhausted, having an excessive sense of fatigue or malaise, not feeling well at all, no energy, no get up and go, just low energy and almost a low interest in doing the normal things that you would do, having the normal routine, the normal daily agenda that you would, because of that severe lack of energy and exhaustion. The second dimension to burnout is an increased mental distance from one's job, almost a sense of separating yourself mentally from your responsibilities as an employee. And in my story, um, as part of my burnout story, I definitely can relate to that. I mean, there were days I would walk into clinic and my goal was to get in and out of patients' rooms as quickly as possible, not to take lesser care of them, but I just didn't have the mental bandwidth to take on their issues as my own. I'm naturally an empath. I love helping people, and that energy that patients give you off, and you when they're really going through things, they're very ill. Many of us as clinicians, as heart-centered clinicians, we take that on to a degree. And I felt that if I could mentally distance myself in a way, and even emotionally distance myself from my patients, I wouldn't have to take on so much of what they were going through. I definitely remember that being a part of my story in 2020 and 2021. So that's the second dimension. The third dimension is a feeling of negativity or cynicism or a heavy critique of one's job, never being satisfied, always finding something to complain about. Now, all of us, regardless of industry, we work with someone or know someone who is always the Debbie Downer, always negative, always has something negative to say about everything. And this is, I think, a personality trait for some people, which is totally different than this idea of burnout. And in all transparency, that's something I definitely dealt with when I was going through my burnout phase in 2020 through 2022. I love medicine. Most of us who enter into our careers, ones that we choose for ourselves, we do it because we're passionate about it. And I'm passionate about caring for people. I'm passionate about prescribing them what they need to be healthy. I'm passionate about teaching them and educating them on preventative medicine and things that they can do to optimize their well-being. I walk into the clinic and I live for this every day for over a decade. When 2020 came, that began to wane for me. I didn't have that passion as much as I did before. I was passionate a lot about the work, but not about the workplace. And it's a very important delineation to make there. And that's another thing, again, when we talk about reflecting, something that I want you to reflect on for your own life, your own career. When we talk about passion for the things that we enjoy, work, personal life, when those feelings of passion start to wane, is it a lack of passion for the work? Is it a lack of passion for the family or the social activities or organizations you're a part of? Or is it a lack of passion for the workplace dynamics, for the workplace politics, for the workplace policies and protocols that are constantly changing? And it definitely was the latter for me. So I'd love for you, as we're talking about this today, to reflect on that for yourself. When you were losing that sense of passion, where was it being lost? For the work itself or for the workplace and all the dynamics wrapped up into that? Okay, so that air of cynicism and negativity as it relates to your work is another part of this idea of burnout. Very, very important to understand that definition. Why? Because that's a WHO definition, World Health Organization. But wait, there's more. There's more to burnout than that. There's more to burnout than what one experiences at work. When I hear this definition of burnout, when I hear about people talking about burnout as it relates to work, I always put my finger up, maybe figuratively speaking. I put my finger up in the air and I ask myself or whoever's listening in my head, well, what about those of us who work from home? What about those of us who have no employer and we have responsibilities at home or we have responsibilities out in the community? What about us? Do we not suffer from burnout just because we don't go to work or there is no workplace where we're exchanging time for dollars or exchanging expertise for dollars? What about us? Do we not, is what we're going through not considered burnout because of that? And the answer is absolutely not. Absolutely, absolutely, rather. Burnout affects all of us, regardless of where you are. Burnout is much more than what you're exposed to in the workplace environment. Burnout is not just relegated to an office building or a clinic or a hospital or an office or whatever. Burnout can happen there, but it absolutely happens at home. Raise your hand if you're a wife. Raise your hand if you are a mother. Raise your hand if you are a caretaker. Raise your hand if you are a community organizer. You will at some point experience excessive stress in those roles. And although you're not exchanging time for dollars, you're not exchanging expertise for dollars, there is no workplace, you still can succumb to feelings of negativity and cynicism. You still can succumb to feelings of mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion. You still can succumb to feelings of mental, almost escapism, if you will. Think about that. Reflect on that for those of you who don't necessarily fit in that picture perfect box of what the WHO says burnout is, but you definitely have signs and symptoms of burnout. You very well can. And I just want to make sure that you know that it's not necessarily a workplace definition. We're breaking the boxes on that. And I'm so happy to see so many people talking about this thing here. that it's not relegated to just a workplace environment, but it can permeate any place that you exist, that you have responsibilities that can become so overwhelming for you that you begin to exhibit this type of behavior. So we now will talk about causes for burnout. These are very important. Lack of control. Let's talk about these in some detail because this is very, very important. Lack of control. When it comes to workplace, let's call it workplace burnout and personal or home burnout. One of the things that I think contributes to burnout in the workplace is that employers delegate tasks to their employees. There's a certain number of assignments or a certain level of responsibility that we have that's coming down from a superior. We have to come to work at a certain time. Your shift is from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. That is when you're on the clock. If there are expectations for overtime, you are expected to be there. When you are off the clock, we're going to give you a laptop and we're going to give you a cell phone. And on your off time, if we contact you about a certain thing that needs to be done, we're expecting you to do those things in a timely manner. We want you to have this laptop so that you, on your off time, can check in and dial into these reports and this and that and the other, or sign on for a Zoom call for this meeting at 10 a.m. when you're off that day. You know what I mean? I know you know what I mean. So this idea of lack of control as it pertains to the workplace environment is an important contributor to burnout. When you don't have control of the way you do your work, when you feel silenced in a way when you feel silenced and you feel like you can't speak up and raise your hand or bring about or bring up the fact that, I think there's a better way that we could be doing X, Y, and Z, as opposed to you doing this. How about we do this? Or I don't really like the way that XYZ is being done, and this is what I propose we do in lieu of that. When you don't feel you have those options available to you, and let's face it, many of us in the workplace don't. We just don't. You sign up to do this job, you're gonna do it this way, you're gonna show up on these times, these days, and if you can't do that, then unfortunately we can't have you here. So that lack of control in terms of controlling the flow of the workday, what you can do, or maybe even how you do your work, is a large contributor to burnout. Many of us, we love the idea of sovereignty, of autonomy, of agency, even in the workplace. And I think that sense of autonomy is removed when we don't have the ability to speak up and say, maybe we can look at this a little differently. Or perhaps, I'm able to do some work at home the same way I'm able to do it here. Let's sit down and talk about how we can make this beneficial for both of us and make it beneficial for me. When that opportunity is taken away from you, that control is essentially taken away from you, and it's a huge contributor to burnout. Now, flip side, that's workplace. What about at home? For those of us who have obligations in the community or have obligations at home with family, with children, with spouses, oftentimes we don't have control there either. Maybe we have a bit more control than what we would in a workplace environment, but not all of us are privy to that in the home with our children, with our families. If you're a caregiver, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Many of us play the caregiver role. Sorry, we don't get the choice to sleep in until 9 o'clock. We have to be up at 7, or we have to be up at 6 to give medications, or to make sure that the person we're taking care of is okay, checking in with them, getting them to the restroom, or feeding them at a certain period of time, or making sure that they get to their appointments, their medical appointments on time. If you have children, you can't sleep in. There's no sleeping in. You get up, you do the things you have to do. And when you find yourself in that role, it just becomes a part of your identity. But it's not a self-imposed identity in many cases. It's something that you have to do because of the responsibilities that you have. And that is a lack of control. And that can definitely lead to burnout on that side of the coin. Dysfunctional workplace is also another huge source of burnout. When you're working with people that you don't like, there's politics, there's protocol changes every single day, like it was for me in the midst of the pandemic. Every day you walk into the hospital, okay, we did things like this yesterday. Today we're doing them this way. The next day, totally different protocol, totally different policy. And it is so draining. Everyone's confused. No one knows what the right thing to do. Well, I was here yesterday and we were told that the COVID test should be done this way. Well, no, I'm sorry. We were just told today that the COVID tests are going to be handled in this way. And there's just a state of confusion and dysfunction within the group, which can cause burnout in a massive, massive way. The same thing can be said for the home environment, for all the obligations that we have as women outside of a workplace setting. Dysfunctionality is huge. Children may not be getting along. Maybe you're not getting along with your spouse, your significant other. Maybe there are outside things that are going on that are affecting the dynamics of the relationship. Maybe there are social things that are going on. Like I mentioned in my story, there's just, you feel like you're living in I can't even think of the word that I would want to use. It's a dysfunctionality. You're living in a place where you don't know whether you're coming or going. You don't know what's left, what's right. You don't know what's up, what's down, and it's hard to take the next logical step because you don't really know what the next logical step is. You kind of lost your way. That's a huge, huge contributor to burnout. Lack of social support, huge. We all need relationships. And I say this often and endlessly. Healthy relationships keep us healthy. When we don't have that support system, that spouse, that counselor, that psychiatrist, that doctor, that provider, that friend to talk to, that person to lean on, that person to vent to, it may not even be that you need any reciprocal advice. It may be that you just need an ear or a shoulder. And when you don't have that, you don't have a way to deal with the excessive stress that leads to burnout. Ultimately, you're just going to go overboard. It's just going to go, it's going to go left. And that's a huge contributor as well. And then work-life imbalance. And this is sadly something that I see women deal with a lot. And I know that you likely can relate. Life and work, as time goes on, just becomes more and more and more confluent, doesn't it? And we don't have that deeply etched line in the sand that separates life from work. And we desperately need to get back to that. It all has to do with boundaries, which are very difficult to implement. For some of us, it's very difficult to implement that. But work being out of balance with life and vice versa is a recipe for disaster and a recipe for burnout. I often tell people that work cannot be a substitute for life. And so many of us have substituted life for work. Work is life. It's what we have. It's our identity. It's who we are. There's so many clients. One of the first questions I'll ask them is, who are you? What are you? How would you describe yourself? And they immediately go into, well, I'm a doctor. I'm an executive. I'm a physician. I am a mental health specialist. I am a nutritionist. I am this, that. I'm an NPH. I'm all these things. And I have to stop them and say, no, I didn't ask you what you do for a living. I asked you, who are you? What are you? Tell me about yourself. Describe yourself to me. Many of us are so locked into this identity of what we do for a living and that being who we are, and us living almost in that straitjacket, as it were. And many times we're desperately trying to get out of it. But we align ourselves so much with that identity that we're afraid to shed it off. It's almost like we put on the coat or put on the armor or put on the clothing of the person that we are in terms of what we do for a living, and we never take those clothes off. Everywhere we go, whether we're in the office or at home or in the street or running errands, buying groceries, going to the bank, we're always identifying as the worker and not the person. We're always identifying as the physician and not the woman that works in healthcare. We identify as the mother and not the woman who has two beautiful children. And we have to be able to separate our work and our responsibilities from life, who we are on a deeper level. This is a very, very important thing and something I work with clients on all the time. Okay. Let's talk about signs and symptoms of burnout. Irritability, being impatient, very, very common. Decreased energy, insomnia. We talked about, feeling exhausted all the time, but the funny thing is you feel exhausted, but you can't sleep very well. That's another common sign symptom. Excessive stress. And again, this is an important thing to kind of pause and put a pin in. Stress is a part of life. We all deal with stress on a day-to-day basis. And stress is one of those things that you should be able to deal with. You should have some tools in your toolbox to deal with. Fairly easy to overcome. You got the tools there, you use them, you're okay. That's not burnout. Burnout is stress times 10. It's excessive. It's consuming. It puts you over the edge. You cannot deal with it anymore. You feel like you're going to crack. That's excessive stress. That's burnout. And it's not the same thing as the daily stressors that we deal with on a regular basis. Again, cynicism, being critical about work, being critical about life, being critical or cynical about the roles you play in life, the responsibilities you have in life. These are all classic symptoms and signs of burnout. So there's some important statistics that I want us to be aware of, because again, we need to really understand how prevalent burnout is among those of us who work, those of us who, and when I say work, I mean in the workplace and at home with all of the outside responsibilities that we have, as I just explained. You're not alone in this. You experience burnout or may have experienced burnout. I've experienced it. You're not alone. Many of us are experiencing burnout and will experience burnout in the future. Nearly 3 in 5 employees report adverse psychological and physical effects from workplace stress. 36% report cognitive weariness. They can't think straight. They're tired mentally. The bandwidth is not there. They can't focus. Many of us, we have a way of focusing on our work, getting things done. We're multitaskers naturally, women are. And one of the signs of burnout is that you just feel like your head is in a cloud, you're in a fog. You can't really uh, dial down on the details of the day, the agenda that we have every single day that we blow through without even thinking about it. Easy peasy. When burnout begins to creep in, that task, that agenda list becomes very, very difficult to get through. 32% report emotional exhaustion. This is another thing. Physical, mental, emotional apparatuses are affected heavily by burnout. Sometimes you'll just burst out into tears for no reason. You just don't know why. You may become depressed. You may become anxious. These are all, especially for those of us, those of you who may not have a past of mental illness. These can be some signs and symptoms that creep in, and you're like, where is this coming from? I've never felt this way before. I've never been anxious. I've never felt this low before. I've never felt this tired before. I always want to sleep. What is going on with me? It may be a sign of burnout, and that's a very common thing to happen. And 44% report physical fatigue. These statistics come from the APA, where they did a 2021 health and well-being survey and found these statistics among those who filled out the survey. This is very, very enlightening, very telling in terms of how prevalent burnout is, how it affects so many of us, and again, pointing out the most common manifestations of burnout. So very, very important to pay attention to. So take a look at this picture. Does any of this look familiar to you? Does any of this look familiar to you? Does any of this resonate with you? Running on empty, your battery's about dead. I see a healthcare worker in that picture. I can definitely relate to that one. I see an executive or a professional on the ground, and she's got all of her things around her, papers and cell phone and computer. It's just unrelenting. I think during the pandemic, this transition from in office or in workplace tasks moving to in home, it was helpful, but it also made us hate computers even more than maybe we did in the past. You know, we're a computer savvy society. Everything is tied to our cell phones, our smartphones, and our computers. And moving more online with everything that we do is just another point of exhaustion. It really is. And so I don't know if there's a way around that. I think there's ways that we can cope and deal with it, but I think it'll become more and more and more of our daily lives as time goes on. But I'm sure a lot of this on this picture looks familiar to you, feels familiar to you. This is what burnout looks like. This is what it is. And we've got to get better at recognizing, now that you know what it is, recognizing what it is for yourself, and then having things in place that will help you to overcome and help you to reduce the prevalence of burnout for yourself. Okay. This is another very important thing to note, and that is that burnout culture is indeed a real thing. Burnout is real. Burnout culture doesn't help the situation. We're told constantly work more, sleep less, do more, accomplish more. We hear about hustle culture and doing all, just being a nonstop energizer bunny. This is the culture that we live in. This is the culture that contributes to burnout. And so if I'm speaking to any executives, any entrepreneurs, any business owners, this is something very important for you to recognize. How can you diminish the prevalence of burnout by changing the culture within your workplaces? And for those of us who maybe are self-employed or are working from home with family, being a caretaker, being a wife, spouse, and that type of thing, what beliefs are you buying into that the culture is giving you that is contributing to the prevalence of burnout in your own life? Again, this is why that identification is very important. Identifying yourself as a woman, as a human being, and not a mother first. Identifying yourself as a woman, as a human being, and not a worker first. Because a worker works, a mother is a mother on all the time. A human being, a woman, deserves rest, deserves rejuvenation, deserves empathy, deserves respect, deserves to unplug every now and again. It's all about how you frame this idea of who you are that will help you to relinquish what the burnout culture is serving you or what you've adopted from burnout culture. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not. It's not easy for me. It hasn't been easy for me. And it certainly hasn't been easy for clients that I work with. But this is something we work through as women. We've got to get rid of these ideas or these impositions from burnout culture that tell us that we're lazy, that we need to work harder, that we need to do more, we need to be more responsible for this, and this. We can't say no. It's disrespectful to say no. It's disrespectful to turn down this, and this. We have to begin to identify differently and also identify boundaries that we can implement that make us comfortable, but also give us permission to take good care of ourselves so that we can play those roles every day that we've signed up for, but play those roles well and not from a dry, empty cup, but from a cup that's overflowing. So quickly, because I'm running out of time already. I can't believe I've been talking for 40 minutes, but I hope through the course of this that you've gleaned some information that you've not heard before And I've given you a way to think about things that you've not thought about in this way before. So, steps to burnout recovery. Again, I'm separating workplace and personal because I think that's a very important delineation to make because of the definitions we're fed about burnout. But when it comes to the workplace environment, I think the number one thing to do is to explore your options. And I'm going to share a very brief story. At the end of 2022, not even 3 months ago, I decided to go from full time to as needed as a clinician, in addition to taking on some volunteer work at a local wellness clinic. I recognized that I wasn't going to be able to change my workplace environment. And so, if the workplace environment wasn't going to change to benefit me, I was going to make the change necessary on my own terms for myself. And that's what I did. And I was able, fortunately, to do that. So, the first thing I will suggest to you as it pertains to the workplace environment is to explore your options. What options do you have to diminish or reduce the prevalence of burnout? What things could you implement for yourself that would help to diminish that? Begin to brainstorm and get creative about how you can lighten the load for yourself and find that joy in your work again, where you can maintain that passion for the work, but also adopt a bit more passion for the workplace environment. What can make that environment better for you? Explore options. And you may be like me, where you just decide that there's no way that you can optimize the workplace environment. So you're changing the environment. You're still doing the work, but the environment is different for you. The other thing I'll offer to you is to speak up and be the change you want to see. Don't be afraid. As women, we have to be willing to step out for one another. We have to be willing to speak up, to speak truth, and to speak unabashedly about the conditions in which we work. And if we're not happy about those, we need to bring them to the table for open discussion for two reasons. Number one, higher ups will never be able to say they didn't know. Oh, I didn't know that you were feeling this way. I didn't know that you were going through this. Yes, you did, because we sat down and had a meeting and I told you about these things and we outlined the issues and I presented some ideas for change for you. That's the first thing. The second reason why it's important to speak up is because you have a voice and because your voice matters and your voice is important and your voice can change the world. It can truly change the world. I believe that wholeheartedly. You have a voice, you have to use it, not for yourself only, but for all of us, for all of us. This is very important. When we're talking about burnout culture, this is one of the most powerful ways we can change that culture for ourselves. As it pertains to burnout recovery at home, I want to talk briefly about ideas of self care and self compassion. As I define them, self care is an action, self compassion is an attitude. Self care is what we do to optimize our physical, mental, and emotional wellness. Self compassion is the attitude we take with ourselves, the way we treat ourselves, the way we behave with ourselves, the way we speak to ourselves, the way we love ourselves, the time we spend with ourselves. It's very important that we give time to both of those things because self-compassion is what informs self-care. And you have to make time for these things in order to diminish, to recover, and to reduce burnout at home. The most powerful way to do that is to create a routine. And what I would recommend as tactical, tangible ways to treat burnout is to start by creating a morning or an evening routine, because that way you can extract a certain period of time every day to focus on you. And it doesn't have to be an hour, it doesn't have to be 2 hours, it can be 20 minutes, it can be 30 minutes. And it doesn't have to be all at once. You can break those up throughout the day. But if you create a morning or evening routine, it's a way to prepare you for the day or to help you to unwind at the end of your day. Depending on your lifestyle, you may want to opt for a morning or an evening routine. And there's so many ways that you can do that, so many ways that you can build a routine that will help you not only to recover from burnout, to recover from excessive stress, but also to prevent it, to reduce its prevalence and to reduce its recurrence. Okay, so next steps, I have a gift for you. I have a gift for you. There is a QR code there on the screen. And if you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to a platform, which is my Talkadot platform. I would love it if you could give me a survey, a review rather, on the topic today. Hopefully you got some valuable information from me today. And if you scan that QR code and go into that survey, I'm going to gift you a checklist that you can use to build your very own self-care routine. Now, it's a self-care routine that I put together for health professionals, but anybody, doesn't matter what you work or what industry you work in, no matter what your role is in the world, any and everybody can benefit from this checklist. So I invite you to scan the QR code and retrieve this burnout recovery checklist. And not only do I want you to download it, I want you to implement it. It's very important. You can have all the knowledge in the world. If that knowledge is not applied, it is useless to you, and it's useless to the world. I want to leave you by saying you are powerful, you are strong, you're weak sometimes too, and that's okay. We can't be strong all the time. You are resilient and you can overcome. Now that you know what burnout is, you know how it manifests, and now that you have the tools to recover, you can experience a level of resilience in your life that you may not have thought possible. You may not have thought possible, but it is with the right tools in place. And this tool that I'm giving you here today is a great first step in making sure that you can recover from burnout if you are currently experiencing it, but also putting something very strongly and very concretely in place that will prevent you from experiencing burnout to the degree that we've described here today in this talk.